All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Unleashing Telco Innovation, Agentic AI, and Connected Intelligence. I'm 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀. I'm the CTO for the telco industry at Microsoft. And joining me in this session, we have the privilege of having great partners here that'll be joining me for a panel. Mathew George, who's VP at T-Mobile, and Gustavo Duarte, VP at our partner Nokia. You've probably had the opportunity to learn a little bit about becoming frontier. Certainly that has been a theme of Ignite this year. If you had the opportunity to maybe go to the Connected Future with AI session yesterday, which kind of delved into how telcos, carriers, communication service providers are leveraging Agentic AI across their entire business, you would have seen some examples and use cases and success stories around enriching employee experiences, around reinventing customer engagement, bending the curve in innovation, which is really around creating new revenue streams by leveraging AI. In this session, we're going to narrow down a bit around reshaping your business processes. How can you begin to leverage AI capabilities, agents, in order to streamline a lot of those processes? They can be operations support systems types of processes. It could be BSS processes for business support systems. So more importantly, because we are operators, and many of you are operators here, so in how can we reinvent network operations and begin to automate a lot of those processes by leveraging Agentic AI. T-Mobile, Mathew will be sharing some stories around how T-Mobile is leveraging those capabilities, and looking forward to spending a few minutes in the panel discussing those issues. Now, how many of you are carriers, operators, CSPs, or work regularly on your network? Network is part of your remit, maybe some hands, and so you probably are familiar with the TM Forum. TM Forum is a telco standards defining organization. They primarily focus on standards related to OSS, BSS, integrating systems together, but they have spent some time really in landing the bridge where operations, the OSS systems meet the network. And how do you really begin to leverage a lot of that capability to begin to automate your networks, right? Moving towards network autonomy. They've defined a scale of automation, right? From a level 0, which is essentially a carrier that hasn't implemented any sort of automation across the network, all the way through to a level 5 autonomous network type capability, where you now have a fully autonomous self-healing network, right? That can essentially run on its own. And at each stage, level 1 through level 5, you begin to implement specific network capability, autonomous network capabilities. Your ability to ingest network telemetry, your ability to be able to deal with real-time network data, logs, and such from all the different network elements that exist. In a level 2, you may begin to use agents like Copilot, general purpose agents, to begin to harness that data and deliver insights from that data by using natural language. And as you progress through the various different levels of autonomy, you gain additional autonomous capabilities, right? So in level 3, perhaps the agents are now providing recommendations on how you can solve an issue, where an operator can now implement that recommendation. Level 4 and 5, those things can become more autonomous, right? So for example, one example would be an autonomous agent that helps you deliver or deploy a new network function, right? And following, for example, a SOP or a MOP guidance or a runbook that you have in order to deploy a service, you can allow an agent, for example, a level 4 agent, to go and deploy and test the quality of that deployment and so forth. Now, we provide a platform, Microsoft provides a platform across all of these capabilities, from Microsoft Fabric that enables you to, again, be able to ingest all of that near real-time network telemetry in a very efficient and cost-effective manner. Copilot, Microsoft 365 Copilot, that again enables you to easily query through that data, to all of the innovations you heard about Microsoft Fabric this week, where you can now create your own agents, orchestrate them, and ultimately apply them across your network in order to reduce operational expenses, be be more efficient and streamlined and so forth. Now, I want to present to you our own internal case study as to how Microsoft, and more specifically the Azure network team, has leveraged a lot of those ideas, capabilities, best practices in how we run and manage our own network. As you probably know, the Azure network is, the fiber network specifically, is one of the largest networks in the world and consists of over 500 kilometers of fiber. And so that's essentially from here and to the moon and a little bit more with regards to how much fiber we have laid out there. And as you can imagine, our biggest threat is a man with a shovel. Right? We suffer fiber breaks on a regular basis, not unlike any other large carrier that owns such a network. And so managing that, is quite an interesting job to say the least. We also have significant growth. So we've already announced 70 plus regions of Azure, 400 plus data centers across the world, all of which, of course, are interconnected with our fiber network. And of course, growing at a massive rate. AI has accelerated our growth, including the network, where you now see tremendous bandwidth utilization from AI workloads, both training as well as inference. And now, how do you deal with that growth, right? Are we going to have to hire 10 times the staff in the next 4 years to keep up with growth? The reality is that's just not plausible, right? It's not economically feasible. And so we had to leverage AI. And so I introduce you, and please meet our 3 new employees. These are 3 of the AI agents that we developed, modeled very closely to actual roles within a NOC, a Network Operations Center, and members of the Azure networking team. So each one of these agents, it's a specialist. They take very specific responsibilities around what they do. So for example, Naomi, she's a NOC manager, very much what you would expect a NOC manager to do. She looks at dashboards, blinking lights, logs. She's able to assess problems, be able to triage them, route them and assign them to the right engineer. In some cases, they're assigned to Pal, who is a tier 2 support engineer and can do deep thinking, trying to determine really what's the root cause of the issue at hand. Now, these agents can be interactive. You can start a conversation with them via Copilot, via Teams, for example, or email. They can be semi-autonomous, so they can be triggered by a certain event. They can be fully autonomous in the sense that they can essentially work without really any human intervention whatsoever. And that's the case with our last example agent here, Miles. And Miles is really our fiber repair agent. And so when Naomi detects an issue related to a fiber cut, for example, or a fiber outage, she's going to route or assign that ticket to Miles, who can then fully autonomously be able to communicate with vendors, suppliers, be able to provide them with whatever information they need to repair that fiber issue, and ultimately be able to close that issue, including doing the quality testing to ensure that the fix sticks, again, without any human intervention. So Miles alone, he's probably our VIP customer or employee of the week every week because he solves more cases than any of his human counterparts. Now, it's not just these 3 agents that we've built. Yes, these agents exist and more, but it's the underlying foundation, the model, the framework that we built, which we coined NetAI, which really provides some additional capabilities that enable these agents to do their jobs. For example, there's a state manager, right? So that state can run across agents, across time. There's a really interesting concept of an asset library. So that, for example, prompts, queries, other types of capabilities can be engineered by people and then utilized by these agents, rather than allowing these agents to go and dynamically create, for example, Couto scripts or SQL scripts. They can actually use curated, embedded assets from the library. So we do have a full architecture in this. We have a case study that we were just released. In fact, a white paper that's downloadable. I'll provide a link at the end that kind of goes into the detail about how these agents were built and why. Also talks about some of the future as to where we're going with this. One of the things that we've been able to do is now to harvest a lot of that knowledge, a lot of those best practices that we ourselves created and utilized to, again, automate many parts of the Azure network, and provide it as guidance to both our customers and partners in the form of the Network Operations Agent Framework, which, again, we'll provide a link to this at the end as well. And so you can think of the 𝗦𝗲 as essentially an accelerator that helps you implement similar capabilities for your own network to be able to implement the UI capabilities, the multi-agent framework as well that contains these capabilities as well. So great link I'll be providing at the end of the session as well. A couple of key learnings that I want to target here and I want to mention. Of course, all this is available in the white paper, and much more detail we'll be able to cover here. But one was around ensuring that agents that you create are being integrated across the applications that are readily used by your employees, by your users, right? In our case, it happens to be Teams, Outlook, Microsoft 365 Copilot, right? That's where these agents live. They essentially will expose their capabilities naturally in areas or in applications that are already in use. That was really one of the key learnings around how you implement a successful multi-agent framework. A second one that we learned was around tailoring those large language models. Right? There's been a lot of talk around creating industry-specific large language models, whether it's a telco large language model or healthcare large language model and so forth. The reality is that, yes, you can do some fine-tuning of the large language model of your choice, but what we found is that there's very little advantages in doing so, and a lot more complexities that can be introduced. So by using really fine-crafted RAG, for example, that really provided a greater value since these models were quite capable on their own. Maybe the last learning that I want to touch on here is related to our use of traditional machine learning models for doing things like anomaly detection. Now, for a very long time, we've been building more and more complex machine learning models to try to determine what anomalies may exist in our network, and so we can go and investigate those or be able to do predictive analytics and go and prevent the problem before it happens. What tended to happen is that these models created a lot of false positives, and so they actually created a lot more problems than they ultimately solved. And the advantage that they had over more traditional statistical methods wasn't really that significant. It was a single percentage point gain in our ability to, for example, detect the problem before it occurred. And so our focus has really been more on rapid problem resolution, right? So focus on, if there's an outage, redirect that as quickly as possible and go and fix that as quickly as possible, rather than trying to spend a lot of time on building complex models that in fact generated a lot of false positives and a lot of noise. And so the last slide before I bring my good partners up on stage are some of the benefits that we've been able to find from utilizing this AI agentic type of a framework across people, process, and technology. Probably on the people one, the most important one that we can gather is that we have a limited supply of network engineers, of operations folks, right? Our staff is always going to be capped. It's always going to be limited. Agents are now a maximizer, it's superpower, because now each person is really responsible, and each employee, human, is responsible in creating and ensuring that these agents have the right knowledge to solve the right problems. And so they're really, in our parlance, agent bosses, right? They're actually now managing agents much more so than doing their traditional job. So if anything can be automated by an agent, it's really that workflow, that process is moving to an agent. And what we've been able to do is really increase the load or the number of cases that it can be managed by humans dramatically, right? So 40% more cases in this case. And you'll see some additional benefits, and of course all these are outlined in the white paper, which again I'll provide a link to at the end of the session. So now I do want to invite my partners on stage, so please Gustavo and Mathew join me, and we have some great questions related to your successful use and implementation of these types of technologies. So welcome, folks. Please take a seat. We will have, we don't expect to have time for Q&A, but we'll be available immediately after the event. And so if you have questions, by all means do. If you do have a pressing question now during our session, go ahead and ask, and now can repeat the question as well. So thank you for joining us. And do you want to just say one word or two about yourselves?
Yeah, so Mathew George, I have the privilege of leading our software and AI technology enablement team on the network side at T-Mobile. Excited to be here.
Yeah. Super. Yes, and I'm Gustavo Duarte. I'm in charge of all the autonomous networks applications for Nokia for North America. So trying to help all the CSPs like T-Mobile, embark and mature on this automation journey.
Yeah. Terrific. Thank you for being here. And we've been working together now for a while on your autonomous journey. We're partnered with Nokia as well in ensuring that, again, we can deliver on some of these capabilities in a more turnkey way so that, again, you don't have to necessarily build this yourself. But let's talk a little bit about benefits of this technology, right? Because you've been on this train for quite a long time, Mathew. This is not new to you. You guys had a very successful project where you were able to consolidate a lot of the network telemetry, and that was, essentially the level 1 and 2 of that automation journey that we spoke about earlier. But you're now pushing towards greater autonomy. And so, what are some of the benefits that you're seeing as you go on this journey?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. At T-Mobile, we always like to start with customer centricity, right? Like anything we do is around the customer, and we think about how is that customer experience going to benefit. Customer love at scale, like we like to say. And data and AI really give us an opportunity to go tackle that scale piece in a meaningful way. Like one of the things we're very proud of is, we're a service that people need and need at times of need, right? Like so, when you think about natural disasters, that's like a very unfortunate but real part of our lives in this country. And hurricane seasons come like clockwork every year. And what we've been successful in doing of late is leaning into our data and AI and autonomous network journey to really help mitigate the customer impact. So imagine a scenario where a couple of sites go down. The sites in the neighborhood that's survived the hurricane path. Now we could actually, because of our data and AI, autonomously tilt and manage the power of the surviving sites so you mitigate the impact of the sites that are down, and this happens without human intervention, right? And this is about mitigation so that those customers who are affected have a chance to call 911 or reach out to a loved one and say they're okay, while the tower crews and the rest of the folks get in there over the next several hours or days to kind of get this back to normal. And that's been a huge win, and this could not be possible if not for the partnership we have with Microsoft and Nokia.
Well, I appreciate that, especially living in Florida, so I know a thing or two about hurricanes as well. Yeah. Gustavo, how about you? Especially you're helping many other CSPs go through this journey. What are some of the benefits that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, and it's great to see operators like T-Mobile really shifting and creating tangible use cases. I think this has been one of the biggest challenges that we see, right? I mean, there's always a lot of science projects that you can do with automation, but if you don't do anything that really creates a tangible outcome that you can validate, it's very hard. And seeing that in real life application, it really makes us more confident to keep investing. It makes us, the industry, more confident to put money on that, right? I think essentially one of the biggest advantages that we see is the shift by automating routine tasks, right? It really allows you now to shift the brain resources that are scarce, as you mentioned, on your presentation about the human brains, right? They're still very limited, but then you start allocating them to really attack more complex products, with or without automation, right? The automation will be a journey that it will be always continuously being matured and enhanced, but at least you start shifting things that doesn't have to be done by humans, should not be done by humans at this stage, because we all have technologies to support that, right? So this is a big benefit that we see already straight away.
No, that's terrific. So humans focus on the higher order tasks, and AI agents can focus on essentially the more repeatable types of use cases. Yeah. Let's shift from benefits to challenges, and maybe we'll start with you in this one, Gustavo. What are some of the challenges that you see your customers and your telcos
I'll bring a couple. I mean, I'm sure.
And maybe let's focus not so much on the technology ones, but process or business types of challenges, or others that you see.
Sure. I think the biggest challenge, there are two set of challenges that I see. One is the skill sets and the mind shift that you need to have when you're doing automation by design, right? When you're really implementing an autonomous organization or autonomous networks. But I think the other area that for me is very important is for you to fully automate, you need to make the data trustworthy, right? Mm-hmm. So you need to trust the data. And I think right now that's one of the biggest fears from a process point of view, that if I'm to have AI helping us making suggestions is one thing, and it's important, and we're going through that cycle. The moment you really want to move to a fully autonomous, and you don't trust the data, you cannot trace back, you don't have lineage, you don't control who has access to what data for what purpose, for what period. That's a big challenge, right? And that's why we are collaborating, all the three of us together, in terms of how can we create a fabric that has that data management capabilities, how we expose that in a way that it can be traced back, how can you explain the AI actions that are being taken, so that if some problems happen, you can always trace back and you create more confidence to proceed. Right?
Traceability being a key factor.
A key one, yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about the importance of good trustworthy data, right? Curated data that the people can use, and this whole connected intelligence paradigm rests on good data. The other piece that when you think about challenges, it's about the human side of it, right? How do we get humans to buy into this idea that AI is a resource and a partner versus a competitor? And one of the things I like to think about and talk about internally at T-Mobile is this idea of big I and little I, right? When you think about big I, it's innovation done by a group like mine. Like we have, it's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to build new things and solve problems. But the little I is where the real value comes. And the little I, in my mind, is where it's the knock tech who deals with these alarms on a regular basis, the field tech who has to go fix the site, a tier 2 engineer that's got to troubleshoot a problem. They actually have a better sense of what is the problem they face and where do they run into roadblocks. And if you empower them to create little solutions and then come to you with that proof of concept solution that they built, and you scale that up to leveraging the resources and the scale that you have, to then make it a consumable solution for the broader team, then you've got value creation, and you've got adoption, and you've got people buying into this idea that AI is my partner, right, helping me do something better. And we've got some great sort of early wins happening in that space, where we're seeing that our ability to serve a customer when they come and call in with an issue about the network, it's actually a lot faster if the human that's answering the phone can leverage AI to solve the problem versus trying to do it on their own. And the scale is massive, right? Like we're talking multiple hours for a human by himself or herself versus minutes when the human uses AI to help solve the problem. And then you think about the customer angle of that, right? You're all customers of hopefully us at T-Mobile, if not one of our competitors. And when you have an issue, your ability to actually get resolution when you're on the phone with us versus us telling you, hey, here's a ticket number, we'll call you back in 24 hours. It's a big difference, right? And it creates brand trust, it creates value. So yeah, I think that's another piece that is a challenge, but I think the more you create these little examples, the more you can get people bought in.
No, that's terrific. And so what I'm hearing here is that what the statistic that we heard yesterday about within, say, 3 to 5 years, 1 billion AI agents being deployed across the world is probably not unrealistic, right? And the fact that your own employees, your operators, analysts can actually begin to create these agents, and they are the domain experts. They are the knowledge. That is their job, and so they're now being able to pass on that organizational and knowledge as well as the domain knowledge into an agent, right? And so pretty incredible. You also mentioned something super interesting related to if you have a customer on the phone, you don't want that lag or latency of not being able to resolve that issue immediately. And we ran exactly into that same issue with Miles, whom you saw a little earlier. Miles is our fiber outage or repair specialist. And so he mainly corresponds with suppliers, with vendors, with contractors that are doing the fiber fix, right? And that's obviously something that can't be automated. You have to send the crew out to splice that cable, that fiber. But there's a lot of communication that happens, right? In fact, by SLA, every 45 minutes, we need to communicate with that supplier to ensure that they're moving as fast as they can and repairing that. Because Miles doesn't sleep, he doesn't eat, he doesn't take cigarette breaks. He's always there, available to respond to that email, to the Teams message, right? So there's no lag, there's no latency. And that mere fact alone has improved our time to repair by 25%, right? So just because he's very responsive. Very similar to the case that you mentioned around customer care, you want to be able to have that answer immediately, not the next day.
It's very interesting because I'm creating an emotional connection already with Miles.
No, Miles is great. Miles is great. Maybe I'll stay with Mathew. You mentioned that you guys have created a bunch of agents, but what's next? What are you guys looking at? What other types of AI agents are you looking to create as your team working on?
I think most of the industries, and in fact, I can speak for telecom in general. Like we've been on this automation journey for the better part of a decade. And at T-Mobile, there's plenty of automation. I'm sure it's the same at most of our competitors as well. But the big difference between then and now really is when you look back, automation's always been about solving a particular problem. I'm going to automate this task. But it's a human that actually invokes the task. It's a human that ensures that the task completed and assured the outcomes were good. And then it's again a human that maybe automates the next task or triggers the automation for the next task. And I think in this new world of agentic AI, we actually get to automate workflows and processes, right? And even better, relook at some of these processes and workflows and say, could they be done better? Could they be orchestrated differently? And I think that's where that's the journey we're embarking on now, is looking at agents to sort of help with the workflow, because there's enough data that says, when can I do an upgrade of a particular network element, right? When is the traffic the lowest? Yep. So an agent can analyze that usage pattern and then determine this is the right time to trigger that upgrade or configuration change. And then there could be another agent that looks at performance metrics post-change. Did they meet the criteria and thresholds that we set? And then return that element back into normal service. And restore the traffic patterns, et cetera. So all of this, allows us to get from a human in the loop to a human supervised world, right? And I'm sure plenty of my engineers will be happy to say, I don't have to get up at 2 a.m. in the morning to check on that upgrade, right? Like it's not about replacing that human, but giving that human a better quality of life or better work-life balance because you've got an AI agent that's helping them do some of the things that they are not so excited about doing. So. That's something I'm excited about, and I think there's going to be a lot of value that comes out of that.
Great use cases. Gustavo, how about you? What do you see coming with regards to agents, and what's Nokia working on?
Yeah, so again, and going back to your presentation in terms of the, climbing up the ladder on autonomous networks, what we are seeing, so we have focused a lot, both internally in terms of how we can, deploy our solutions faster without too much human intervention or with no human intervention at all, how you can scale. What we are seeing more, and we're working with partners like T-Mobile, but also across the globe and we're seeing a lot of attention now is shifting a little bit towards the service operations layer. So how can we're already working on automating it for slicing, for example, but how can we automate this with the use of agentic AI and breaking it down into different areas. For example, on the orchestration side, how can I really enable that intent translation between the business layer into the service, into the resource, area so that I'm simplifying the process, freeing up the business layer to really speak the business language, right? And not have to inherit any type of complexity. On the assurance side, and having agents that can not only do the predictive, assurance that we are already working, but analyzing and applying reasoning into those anomalies that are being detected, and ultimately closing the loop with the automation, with the orchestration, right? So that you can start taking those actions together, but in a very organized and structured way. And last but not least, I think what's very important, and I didn't cover on the challenge, but it is a big challenge, is the security part.
Right.
I mean, I think the fact that we are moving into this autonomous environment, and with the openness of the network as it is right now, the number of touch points or endpoint detections that we need to control, the number of threats and attacks that are possible are endless, right? So you have to have all this autonomous, but you need to have a security agent as well, and that's what we're working on, to plug in and put the right guardrails on making those decisions, but always monitoring.
Terrific, yeah.
that I'm identifying new threats, I'm acting, remediating as fast as possible, preventing as much as possible. I think there was, not very recently, there has been some announcement of the first AI agent orchestrated attack, right, using some platform. So the threat is there. We cannot prevent. I mean, it's part of the evolution, but I think it's a big point that we are heavily investing on. Yeah.
Terrific. And shameless plug, but we can learn more about the Nokia cybersecurity solution on Friday. We have a session there with
exactly.
colleagues leading there as well. I mentioned some of the lessons learned, which, of course, there's 100 and many more in the white paper I mentioned. But what are some of the lessons learned at T-Mobile as you guys continue down this journey?
So this idea that we're going to succeed as a group, right? This is a collective effort. It's not one organization. It's us, all of us together, and that's a very important concept that we found that embracing that really accelerated the journey, right? I mean, I talked a little bit about the little I and the big I, getting folks bought into this idea and setting up governance models that give everybody a seat at that table. So, and like in our case, that's making sure that the field operations, our network operations, our transport and IP team, like every single organization is represented in that governance model. So they get to see what everybody's working on, what are the priorities, and why did we prioritize them as such, and how do we make trade-offs, right? So like that belief and buy-in into the process has been it's kind of been a very important lesson learned, if you will, that's accelerated the journey for us.
No, that's terrific. I think, Gustavo, you mentioned essentially what was garbage in, garbage out related to the data, right? So you have to have vetted data, trust your data, and so forth. And I know that was a huge part of the effort at T-Mobile. And again, this is a multi-year project. We spent a lot. Any lessons that you can share related to how you began that process of essentially not necessarily just consolidated, but wrangling the data from so many different sources, so many different parties, elements, and building that trust before you can really be able to scale your AI efforts? Yeah, so it's in the old days, people used to think about all of my data needed to sit together in one big lake, right? And I think while that could definitely work, the reality is data is fragmented, and fragmentation is not in itself a problem. It's your reluctance or inability to connect it that's the problem, and that's what we focused on solving, and the team did a tremendous job. Connected intelligence, right? So it's not about moving data, it's about connecting that data and making sure that the intelligence that you're deriving from that connected data is actually available in the right sort of semantic layer, right? That people can consume in multiple places. So you're not reinventing or recreating the data product multiple times, just so that you can solve one more use case, right? So that really does sort of reduce the barrier to entry and innovation. When you connect your data, you curate it, and you create these data products that are consumable across multiple use cases. Yeah, no, that's terrific, and that's a challenge that we often find ourselves helping our customers with, right? Gustavo, Nokia data suite, right? So that is one platform that potentially can help operators more rapidly move in that direction. Can you tell us a little bit about that product?
Yeah, sure. And again, I think if there's one recommendation is really address the data problem, right? I mean, the face on, because that's the first thing. Without that, it would be really hard to convince people to automate and see the results, right? I mean, we are, as you mentioned, we have our data suite, which essentially is a data management framework. But more importantly, it has all the telco knowledge, and I think that's where we're very proud, because we do have the knowledge, from the access to transfer to the core and to the data center. We can bring that. We have the ability to do the whole lineage, the traceability, the access and contract management, so control, so that you can enable it. And then we don't need to do this alone, so we integrate that to, for example, T-Mobile initiative on that data, so we can focus on where we add value, which is essentially, I think, the telco knowledge. We can then partner with, like what we're doing already with Microsoft with the Fabric, so that we can then extend this into other layers towards the business, inherit all this, the AI capabilities and tooling that you have, but definitely is a big piece, and for me is the foundation of any successful automation. Yeah.
Terrific. How about some recommendations, right? So we have a lot of telcos. Again, they're going to be in very many places from a maturity standpoint, right? Some are just beginning their journey. Some are quite advanced, much like you guys are at T-Mobile. But what are some of the recommendations that you have when telcos that are relatively new and starting their autonomous networking journey? What are some of the top 3 things, let's say, that you'd recommend?
Yeah, and I think, I don't want to sound like a broken record saying the same things over and over again, right? But I couldn't emphasize it more, right? Like this idea that don't waste your energy trying to move all of the data into one big data lake. That energy is better spent just making sure the data is connected and you're creating consumable data products that are reusable across. And when I say reusable, your business teams that are trying to get insight into our customer behavior and your network teams that are trying to operate the network better should be able to consume that same network product or data product that you created, right? That's the concept that I would encourage folks to embrace. Think for others. Think broadly. Governance, right? Good governance that gets all the right people at the table, because you cannot create these extensible data products if you don't have everybody at the table kind of weighing in on how could they use it and what would they benefit from, et cetera. And then driving that innovation piece, right? Encourage people who have little, the little eye, the people who are maybe not at the table, but have leaders at that table and who can innovate and create little proof of concepts and raise their hand and say, I'd like to see this scaled, and have a way for them to see that scaled, right? I think those would be my sort of call to action, if you will.
Yeah, those are terrific. And I love what you said earlier about data fragmentation is not the problem, right? There are ways where you can bring that data in virtually, right, and be able to leverage it in a way. And in fact, that's very aligned. TM Forum has a project called the Modern Data Architecture, MDA, where they've kind of moved on from recommending huge data lakes. Hey, move all of your data into a data lake, or before this it was into a big enterprise data warehouse. The reality is it's not necessary, right? You don't need to do that. However, what you have to do is governance, right? And that's the piece that is probably even more important, right? So having your ability to catalog all the data that exists, right? So it's discoverable by the end users, people that can benefit from that data, and of course having control, data access controls, on that data, right? So you can ensure that data is not leaking or leaving or not being accessible by folks that shouldn't have access to that data. And of course, Fabric, Purview, a lot of the capabilities within our portfolio are completely aligned with that strategy. And in fact, we have a reference architecture of how you essentially build that TM Forum modern data architecture using Fabric and Purview primarily. Happy to share with you as well. How about some top recommendations from you, Gustavo?
Well, already, I think, again, not to repeat, the data is critical. I think we all agree on that. Start. I mean, here we have a customer, an operator that is very advanced and trying But there's a lot of other operators that are hesitating, right? And they're doing small projects. So finding the right starting point that is not small enough that is just it sounds like a hobby more than an actual problem, but solve a problem that you can contain. Don't try to boil the ocean, and putting dimensions around, I need to be level 5 irrespective, but build something that we can really justify it and measure the results. I think this is a fundamental piece. And I think with that, it comes with the skilling and the reorganization of the company, right? If you're really going to embark yourselves into an autonomous operations company, then you need to have the organization thinking on the same line. So keep skilling the people, different layers. There are room for learning for the technical people, but also on the leadership, you need to understand this new mindset that you want to implement, and what does it mean? Because that also will affect how you manage your partners, how do you collaborate with the partners, how can you fail faster than ever in order to fix and resolve. So there's a lot of shifts that needs to happen, but the first thing is start, right? Let's pick a use case that is tangible enough and controllable enough that you can do it. Because once you have those results, then you have the continuous buy-in to succeed, right, and progress.
Yeah, and Nokia is certainly a great partner to choose to begin that journey, given you have an ample library of models that have already been proven successful with other telcos across the world. Final comment?
Yeah, when I look ahead, right, at what the future holds for us, and 6G is around the corner. People are starting to talk about it. We're trying to standardize what 6G is going to look like, and this world of an intent-based network, right? So today, we build bespoke experiences for customers with our slicing products and things like that are catered to use cases that are predefined, right? Like we've got a first responder slice because we know what first responders need, right? But if you get into a world where needs are evolving. Like at 1 minute I'm a first responder, but I'm a volunteer firefighter. So when I'm fighting a fire, I need that first responder experience. But then, when I'm coaching my kids soccer, I need a very different experience on my mobile device than I had when I was fighting a fire. So how do you match the customer's experience to the intent that they had for that experience? And I think that's the sort of the next frontier for us as a network provider, right? To leverage data and AI to understand customer intent. What are they doing? What do they intend to do next? And then being able to build a network experience that delivers on that intent.
Super interesting.
Excellent.
Gustavo?
No, I mean I can ride on top of that because I see fundamentally the automation has two key angles, right? One is definitely I don't think you can scale any further with the complexity of the networks, with the openness. You cannot scale with humans, right? Especially in the environment that the industry is, that you need to be really efficient. But also, if you do it right and you really enable your business to capture opportunities faster, right? Opportunities that in the past has been taken by a lot of the over-the-top players that comes with no investments on infrastructure and they just attack a problem, right? But I think with a true intent-driven network, you can then start capturing new revenue streams and at the right time, right? With the right context and with the right value. Because also right now, because you're late sometimes and you're in a highly competitive environment, then it goes back to pricing, and that's not healthy for the industry. But if you're doing it at the right time, positioning with the right value, very contextually, that also enables you to increase your top line, right? With value.
That's terrific. And as you said, with 6G networks becoming so much more dense than networks today, impossible to manage unless you're leveraging AI.
100%. Yeah.
So thank you so much, gentlemen, for your insights. Here are some additional resources for you. The QR codes are linking to various resources. The white paper is the first one that you see there. We had a great case study that goes into detail on T-Mobile's use case here, and of course the Nokia white papers on the bottom as well. So I encourage you to download these assets, look them over. And we have 20 seconds for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any questions? Happy to see you immediately afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.